Tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
I'm a curator and writer based in Hackney, but I'm also doing loads of international projects. So I've worked as a curator in China, in Korea, in Milan, and at the moment I'm working in Lisbon. So I'm working between design and architecture.
I'm going to move on to your first image because I want you to talk about the show that you curated in Milan, which became one of the most talked about events during the Milan Furniture Fair.
Well, this is a picture from Hacked, and this was a week of events and workshops. The idea of the week was to try and find different ways of kind of presenting designers' ideas and trying to find things that are not just stuff on plinths. The context of this was that it was in a shopping centre, and so it was surrounded by objects and vases and mirrors and clocks, and they asked to want to do something related to design, but it seemed appropriate to have a bit more fun and be a bit more playful and start looking at the new technologies that designers are working with. And we had a kind of a science team making a handmade particle accelerator. We had a kind of performance art. We had sound design. We had a kind of DIY 3D printer. And this is Dominic Wilcox. He wrote on Twitter that he wanted to race a 3D printer because they're notoriously slow things. So he wanted to have a race with a 3D printer, which I thought might make quite a funny event. This is a photograph by a Spanish photographer. She's called Cristina de Mittel. It's a photography series called Afronauts. And at the moment, I'm doing some research into design in Africa, the kind of urbanized parts of Africa, like Lagos and in Nairobi and places like that, where not only is emerging technology, something that's being sort of appropriated in really interesting ways. Like, I think mobile banking was invented in Africa and so on. But yeah, there's some really interesting design coming out of that place, and there's the Maker Fair in Lagos happening in a month or so, and hopefully I might go and see what's going on there. The narrative of African design is always quite sort of we made it with this and that and recycling and so on, but what I find interesting about this is the technology aspect or the technology angle, and this is part of a kind of, there's also loads of emerging science fiction writers in Africa and science fiction films in Africa, which I also find really interesting, because science fiction is quite an interesting way of kind of designing in its own sense, kind of city-wise and so on, landscapes. So yeah, I think I would be really curious to hear of any other African tips people have, particularly metropolises in Africa, particularly. Yeah.
So what's happening here?
This is Tour Van Balen. This was a show I did in King's Cross, a load of events and performances. There's a real sense of urgency for a kind of more critical design and a kind of conversation about design. And I was on part of this event called the Black Book Project, which was curated by Gillian Russell and Danny Abmis. And they basically put together a series of talks between curators and designers, and they were really trying to find out where critical design is, who's writing it, who's doing it, why isn't there more of it. And it was it felt like a really urgent topic that they really wanted to kind of uncover.
What do you mean by critical design?
So they're talking about, for example, Tour here, they're not making products to sell at design fairs. They're kind of making experiments or kind of social commentaries through their work. So they don't have an aim to be as part of a kind of manufacturing process, but they would rather be involved in a discussion or a kind of more social or anthropological or scientific kind of narrative. I really think this is terrible, and this is a show in Venice this year, and it was at the Venice Biennale in the Norwegian Pavilion, and I just think it's probably what I mean by when I mean by curating design and architecture in a different way. It's different to this, sort of different to putting a model of something and talking about it as if that's the real thing, or as if putting a model on something is enough to make an exhibition. It's just not good enough anymore. You need to have a higher standard.
So what was your opinion on the Venice Biennale as a whole? I mean, some people thought it was a great, the theme this year was common ground, about how architecture can have a bit more social purpose rather than being about expensive icons and luxury houses. But did you think it was well curated? Do you think it was interesting, or is it the sort of the thing we're trying to move away from, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, it was curated by David Chipperfield, who's an architect who makes really expensive houses and museums around the world. and I really like his buildings, and I'm a massive fan of buildings. Sounds ridiculous, but I am. I really like architecture. I really like going to visit them. I really like seeing those spaces. But I don't think that makes for an interesting exhibition like that. I think you need to have a little bit more of an agenda for your audience. I'm working on the Lisbon Architecture Triennale, which is happening next September. So we have a year to go. Our title is Closer. And we're looking at different ways of practicing architecture. In Portugal at the moment, there's, obviously a massive problem economically and so on, but also architects just don't have work. So what else can they do with their skills, and B, who else is practicing architecture, and who else is responsible for, changing the city, working in the city, solving problems. One of the ways we'd really like to engage in the city is by trying to engage with kind of practices that may have solutions for the city that have been caused by the crisis. So we have this Crisis Buster grant program where you can apply for €2,500 to basically make an intervention in the city where, for example, the government has failed or where funding has been cut. We'll try and step in and provide a bit of money for people to kind of help out.
So in a way, is the Biennale you're curating in Lisbon the antithesis of the Biennale that David Chipperfield curated in Venice?
Well, we have a lot more time than they did. That's one thing. We had 2 years to prepare, which they did not have. But we also have a totally different agenda. Yeah, we're interested in the next generation of architects. We're not really interested in showcasing things that have happened, and we want to showcase things that will happen, the people that will change the future of architecture, and the new, who's going to be creating the next city, and what's that going to look like, and that's what we're interested in.
Beatrice, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thanks very much to Beatrice.